You look at the world today with conflicts flaring up from Ukraine to the Middle East, and you can't help but ask that one huge question. Why do nations fight? Well, today we're going to explore a really radical explanation, one that says to find the answer, you have to look way past the headlines and deep into human nature itself.
You know, the usual answers we get. Wars are fought for tangible things, right? Oil, land, a strategic advantage. It all sounds pretty logical. Nations are just acting in their own self-interest. But what if all of those reasons, everything we see on the news, are completely missing the point? All right, let's get into it. The source material we're looking at says that to even begin to understand the real cause of war, we've got to start by ripping off the labels we've been putting on it. So check this out. On the left, you've got the usual suspects, fights for resources, territory, power. But on the right, the source we're looking at calls these things an alibi, just convenient stories to hide what's really going on. So if nations aren't really the ones fighting, who is? And boom, there it is. This is the absolute core of the argument. It's saying the real conflict isn't between these huge abstract things we call nations. Nope. The real fight, the one that's actually driving everything else, is happening at the level of the human ego. Okay, so if the ego is the real troublemaker here, we really need to understand what we're talking about. This next part breaks down this pretty fundamental idea.
Now, when we hear the word ego, we usually think of arrogance, right? But that's not really it. According to this source, the ego is this deep, nagging feeling inside us that we're somehow incomplete, that there's a hole inside. And that feeling creates this desperate, never-ending search for things on the outside to try and fill that void.
And this is where it gets really fascinating. Our technology, our civilization, it's all evolved. But the source claims the ego hasn't. It's still running on the same primitive caveman logic. And here's the key. For the ego to even exist, it has to have boundaries. It needs an other, an enemy, a rival, someone on the opposite team. Without that separation, that us versus them mentality, the ego basically just dissolves. So how does this private internal feeling of emptiness lead to actual tanks and missiles? Let's trace the connection. Here's the chain reaction, laid out perfectly. It starts with that inner emptiness. That emptiness drives a quest for stuff, for consumption, for identity. And getting all that stuff on a massive national scale, that takes a truly colossal amount of energy. And just like that, the fight for oil isn't actually about oil. It's a symptom of a much deeper problem, a fight to feel whole. I mean, what a powerful way to put it. This just perfectly captures why this quest is totally doomed from the start. You could give the ego all the oil, all the territory, all the power in the universe, and it would still feel empty. The hunger is infinite. And that's why the conflicts never, ever really end. And here's a real-world look at that endless appetite. The source points to the United States, a country with one of the highest energy consumption rates per person on the entire planet. But is it ever enough? No. The demand just keeps going up. This isn't a problem of scarcity. It's a symptom of a bottomless internal need being projected onto the world. So if the problem goes this deep, what about our normal solutions? You know, diplomacy, treaties. Well, the source makes a really provocative claim here. It calls all of that mere entertainment. And why? Because all those things are just moving pieces around on the surface. They never touch the real engine driving the whole conflict, the ego. And this brings us to a really critical connection. The source argues that the wars we see on TV aren't happening in a vacuum. They're a direct reflection of the societies that are waging them. We tend to think of conflict as something happening thousands of miles away, right? It's over there, in some other country, totally separate from our day-to-day lives. But the argument here is the exact opposite. Every single external war is just an internal war, playing out on a gigantic global stage. So here's the bottom line. A nation's collective inner peace, or lack thereof, and its foreign policy are two sides of the very same coin. The source uses this incredible imagery, saying the fire you see burning abroad was actually lit first in your own inner cave. It even draws a direct, startling line between a country having high rates of depression and the aggressive actions it takes around the world. Okay, so if diplomacy is just entertainment and the real problem is inside us, what could a real solution possibly look like? Well, this source calls it the only true disarmament. Look at this contrast. On the one hand, you have conventional disarmament, which focuses on the hardware of war, bombs, sanctions, treaties.
The source says that's pointless. Sure, you can stop a country from building a bomb, but what's to stop them from just buying one? The real work has to be internal. It's about disarming, defanging, and detoxifying the root cause itself, the human ego.
So in the end, the path to peace isn't paved with treaties, it's paved with wisdom. It all comes down to education, and not just for world leaders, but for everyone. A kind of deep self-education that's all about understanding and finally moving beyond the primitive, destructive impulses that drive us to conflict. And that leaves us with one last, really profound question to think about. If this source is right, if the wars out there are just a mirror of the wars in here, then the real front line for peacemaking, well, it's not in some faraway capital city. It's a lot closer to home.